Welcome to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards. Stay tuned as we explore the latest resources, thoughts, and trends in workforce development. And now, here's your host, Ron Painter.
Welcome to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Ron Painter, and I am delighted today to have Barbara Dyer, who is president and CEO of the Hitachi Foundation. She is a member of the Hitachi Chief Executives Group and a senior lecturer at MIT. I don't know where you find the time to fit that in, Barbara, but that is great. At the MIT Sloan School of Management. Barbara has shaped the foundation's focus on the role of business in society with an emphasis on the intersection of people and profit. So, Barbara, welcome. Appreciate you taking time out of a crazy busy day to sit down for a little while.
It's a pleasure to be here, Ron. Thank you for inviting me.
Barbara, some folks may not be that familiar with. So tell me a little bit about the Hitachi Foundation, and then specifically, you've had a long career on the public side of American life. So talk a little bit about how your transition now to the private side. Okay,
maybe I'll do that in reverse, so that I had spent a good long time working in the public sector, both in associations, the Council of State Governments, the National Governors Association, and also within an administration. I've worked on all of the issues: energy, environment, health, human services, kids, families, you name it. I sort of touched all of those issues. I'm one of the sort of original policy wonks. And all the while trying to figure out how we could reformulate the challenges in ways that would enable us to make real progress that matter to Americans on the ground, and working with the federal government, with state governments, with local governments. Public policy was my world. And lo and behold, I had an opportunity to join the Hitachi Foundation and discovered the world of business, and decided that this was going to be a really important focus for the next several years, and that was way back in 1998. The foundation was established in the era of U.S.-Japan tension in the 1980s, when Japanese corporations were moving into the United States in a big way, and we were in the midst of a recession, and Americans were only beginning to wake up to the fact of globalization. It was a time of dramatic change for us. And Hitachi, being one of the large, very successful electronics firms in Japan, was moving onto our shores and saw an opportunity to do something larger than simply sell its products here. And in my mind, what Hitachi did then was a great model for the best of globalization. They said that if we're going to build a business in the United States, we need to set roots. We need to deepen those roots. We need to be engaged in American society. Americans need to have an opportunity to make our products, so they move their manufacturing operations here and hired Americans. Americans should own the company, so they were one of the first Japanese companies to list on the New York Stock Exchange. And we should establish a foundation much like American corporations do to give something back to society. But we're going to do it in a different way. We're not going to do it internally, because we really don't know what the issues are in America. So they enlisted one of the great statesmen of the 20th century, Elliot Richardson, to work with them to develop this concept, and he became the original chair. And the idea initially was that the Hitachi Foundation, on the one hand, would help Hitachi understand the context in America for business, help Hitachi understand what Americans expect of good businesses. What are the qualities, what are the characteristics of businesses that can be trusted? And so the first task of the foundation was to think about, what does it mean to be a good business?
But Hitachi as a company, the concept of being a part of the community wasn't foreign to Hitachi, right? It may have been different because they were coming to America, but this is a company that has deep roots
in Japanese society, absolutely, in many ways, and it began back with its founder, who understood business through his own experience with a mining company that felt very committed to the community that was formed around this mining company. And so Mr. Odaira was sort of, understood business when he founded Hitachi in that broader sense. And in fact, his whole vision was to bring the Industrial Revolution to Japan. He had a mission, he had a vision, and he had a sense of purpose. And that pretty much was part of the DNA of Hitachi, and so much so when I arrived that it was really compelling to think about not only the opportunities for Hitachi, but as an independent foundation. And that was the other remarkable thing, is that on our independent mission, we looked much like a private foundation without affiliation to the company. So on the one hand, we're helping Hitachi in understanding what the context is and trying to put some shape and definition to this notion of a good company. And on the other, we were concerned about poverty in the United States, and we operated in a very independent role without regard to the short-term interests of the company. So having set us up as an independent 501c3 with an American board chaired by Elliot Richardson, handpicked by him, the most stellar board, and basically said, we trust you, the board, and the American staff to do the right thing in the United States. And we will work with you. We will be part of this, but we won't direct the substantive agenda of the Hitachi Foundation.
A pretty thoughtful, pretty phenomenal approach to philanthropy. Hitachi, the foundation, you mentioned good businesses and good examples of business. Hitachi's been very involved in thinking about and actually impacting this transformation from a 20th century workplace to whatever the 21st century is. Tell us a little bit about what you all have been examining and what you're seeing.
Sure. So just kind of taking it from that moment when I arrived, and we had this body of work that laid out what it means to be a good business. And it was fascinating to me, having spent all this time in government, and I read this, and it basically said businesses make decisions, right? Businesses make decisions. And the first decision that you make is what it is that you produce. And every decision about the goods and services that you produce every decision involves a choice. And those choices have bearing on the bottom line and have bearing on society in a variety of ways. And so the challenge is, one, to understand the implications of those choices, and two, to try to make choices that do no harm. And the best of all possible worlds is to make choices that create positive economic, social, and environmental value. So this idea in 1997, 98, when this book was written in 97, was sort of the precursor to what we now think of as the triple bottom line or stakeholder view of the firm. And so when I arrived, we had that and this body of work on addressing poverty in very thoughtful ways. But we stepped back and said, well, if we believe that businesses make all of these decisions, what are the decisions that have the most significant impact on low-wealth Americans? Where are the decisions that businesses make that create opportunity? And immediately the conclusion was workforce decisions. It is how they organize their own operations to encompass and to create real possibilities and opportunities for their own workers, and how they structure the deals on the supply and distribution system. All of those choices could potentially have positive effects on workers. So we decided to concentrate at that intersection, as we say, at that intersection of people and profits. That is, all of the ways in which businesses make decisions that have potential for positive bottom line for individuals. So
that's an enormously complex point for business, right?
I'm a policy wonk,
right? But as you talk to business executives, and the push is from me as the shareholder, me as the analyst on Wall Street, I'm focused on what you're going to say on on the call about the quarterly profit.
Yeah.
This is a really hard space for American business right now, isn't it? Or what's...
First, I want to do two things. One is to point out that you're referring to publicly traded companies, which is a part of the American economy, but not all of the American economy. So when I talk about business, I'm talking about the whole array of business. Only a part of it is a publicly traded company that is focusing on quarterly profits. So let's disaggregate. We're looking at startups that make a decision that their product and or service is intended to ameliorate poverty. And then so we're looking at the Hitachi Foundation at businesses from the start that are designed, you can call them social enterprises. We're looking at businesses that are operating in the marketplace with revenue, for-profit businesses, where the goods or services are intentionally innovating to address issues of poverty, and also focusing on helping them to build businesses that have good workforce strategies as they grow. And we're looking at companies in the middle of the economy, mid-sized companies that are privately held. So we're looking at the whole economy. Here's what we did. We said, okay, if we believe that businesses make choices that create real opportunities for low-wage workers, let's test that. Let's see who's out there. Let's see what they're doing. And we decided to concentrate in two sectors, healthcare and manufacturing initially, because we're a small foundation and we can't cover all of the sectors. We decided those two sectors because they happen to be places where there are a lot of poor people working, but there are opportunities for upward mobility. So we went out, we called this our Pioneer Employer Program, and we went out and found roughly 100 companies, 50 in each sector, that were creating really good quality jobs. And we tried to understand what they did and why they did it. So before we could talk to a financial stakeholder or another CEO to say this makes sense to do, we had to find out what's really going on the ground. Now, prior to that, as a foundation, and you know this, we would join forces with other foundations and create large-scale initiatives that involved business and community-based organizations, and the businesses would all play a role. But it was motivated by the grant. We wanted to kind of wipe that off of our screen and just go out and find the businesses that knew nothing about our world, that were just day-to-day operating and creating really good quality jobs. And here's what we discovered.
I was going to ask, before you tell me what you discovered, were you surprised that there was so much good stuff going on?
I was surprised. Because if you think about it, we live in a world where we have lots of conferences, and we usually have one or two businesses that we hold up as the rock star of all of this. And they get paraded around, and they somehow have a budget that they can come to our conferences. Or there might be cases at business schools where I teach at MIT, and there are a few cases that are used over and over again. And I would hear, well, these are just idiosyncratic good companies because the CEO has a big heart and they're privately held more often than not, which is the case, although there are occasionally publicly held companies, but they are exceptions to the rule. And really, if it were good business, if they were really profitable doing this, then more businesses would do it. Well, it turns out that they are profitable and more businesses are doing it. It's just under our radar screen in the world that we occupy.
Right.
They're just out there running their business.
They're doing their thing.
They're not trying to get noticed in the paper. They're not trying to get written up as a case at Harvard or MIT. They're not, at the National Association of Workforce Boards conferences. They're out there doing their thing, making products and making money, hiring people and training them and investing in them and doing well. So we found them through their trade associations and through on-the-ground knowledge of who's out there, and we could have found several hundred. We stopped at 100 because that seemed to be enough. And we figured out what they were doing, and now the work of our foundation is to try to make more of that happen. and to try to really work with the companies that are poised to be like these pioneers. They're pretty close to being there because that's just sort of the next tier, and to figure out what it would take to move them kind of over the top.
And what are those practices that you're seeing that are really critical? What's the, I guess maybe what are the practices? What's the decision point that company makes? Is it like Hitachi? It's in their DNA?
Yeah, yes and no. So I'm just going to run you through, and it's very simplistic, and there's lots of different variations on the theme, and the two sectors are very different in the structure of incentives and how they define customers and how they. So, if you think about healthcare, it's highly regulated. The payment structure is very complicated. Manufacturing is much more straightforward. But just a general walking through. The first thing is they really understand their customer. They understand the idea of success is through their understanding of what the customer wants and needs. Okay, so, and they're totally dedicated to achieving success with the customer. Success with the customer is customer acquisition, getting those customers, and keeping the customers. And so that's where it starts, is we need to understand what the end result is, and the end result is success for our customer. In healthcare, it's patient outcomes, first and foremost. And in manufacturing, it's the person that's purchasing the product. Okay. And then they work back from success, and they think about very critically, and with the use of, enabled by technology and all sorts of management knowledge, they think about how they can organize this operation in order to achieve continuous, reliable success for that customer at a price point that the customer will pay. And in this case, in healthcare, it would be the payers, the insurance companies, the reimbursement structure, and in manufacturing, it's actually the customer. Much simpler in manufacturing. So how do we organize that? And they realize that in order to organize a system that's going to continuously produce high-quality results for the customer, they have to have a top-notch workforce. And they have to have a workforce that sticks with them and that is continuously learning and feels almost like an owner. Each worker feels like an owner, his or herself. And so they need to build that workforce and invest in that workforce. And that's the way it works. I mean, that's the simplest way of describing it, is that we need to have a system, an operational strategy that enables us to be successful over time. So they have a longer-term view. Not always the case in a publicly traded company, because the financial pressures go in the opposite direction. Right. They have a longer-term view. They have a real clear view of who their customer is and what they need to deliver in order to stay successful. And invariably, that leads to a structure internally that invests in their workers, that clarifies success for their workers, that creates an environment of innovation, a sense of ownership on the part of their workers. And remember, these in both sectors, we're talking about workers who have little more than a high school diploma. And the spirit in these places, you can taste it, you can feel it when you walk in the door.
Because the worker senses they're
of
value.
They're really part of it. They're valued. They're absolutely valued. Absolutely right. And the incentives are real. So they often work in teams. They know what success is on a weekly and monthly basis. They meet their numbers. They get rewarded for it. There's a wage structure that sort of is comparable to the success that they're achieving in the firm. So, in that sense, the sort of productivity and profitability of the firm as it grows, the workers are in fact sharing in that wealth. When you look at the curve in the United States over the last many, many years, you see wages stagnating and profits going up. That chart that we all use. In these firms, it's more a chart where they're more in parallel. So that's what we're seeing.
Let me pause and remind you, you've been listening to Workforce Central, the official podcast of the National Association of Workforce Boards from Washington, D.C. I'm your host, Ron Painter. My guest today is Barbara Dyer, President and CEO of the Hitachi Foundation. We're going to be back for the second part of our discussion in the next podcast. Please join us.